Are they becoming the most boring college football team in the nation? MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, talking up Clemson with Pigskin Pete. And when I talk about boring, I'm certainly not talking about you, Pigskin. So it's never, I would never put those two terms with your name in the same sentence at all. How you doing today?
I'm amazing, and I'm fantastic. And I agree with you about the boring part of Clemson football right now because their opponents just aren't up to snuff. But it's definitely not boring if you're a Clemson fan watching them win 26 games in a row. And the word boring and Pigskin Pete are definitely not compatible. I'm a lot of things, a lot of bad things too, according to a lot of your viewers and my own. Boring is not one of them. But thank you.
Yeah, I am. That is not a knock. And so I can see the comments flying my way from Clemson fans as well. I'm not talking about the Clemson football team. I loved watching Clemson football. If there's somebody on the other side of the ball that can actually block a few people, make some tackles, and compete for a little while, unlike Wake Forest, which was supposed to be a couple weeks ago, as of at that point, the second best team in the conference. And man, they may not be that, but they're probably in the top four. So, man, this speaks volumes about where this conference is, and it's not getting better.
No, and Wake Forest, I still think they're a good team. I think Clemson, I'm not saying Wake Forest is an elite team or anything. Don't take it that way, but they were averaging 500 yards a game or 490 yards a game coming into that and averaging 35 points a game or something. Now, I do realize they had a couple of their star offensive players that were injured, and so that really hurt them. But at the end of the day, Clemson's defense is so elite. I believe it's the best defense in the country. Now, you can split hairs between them and Ohio State at this point as who has the better defense. But they have a way of making very good offenses look pedestrian. And look, Wake Forest was a very good offense. I don't care what conference they play in. They were still a good offense, and they got completely shut down. So, but I agree with you.
Well, there's no doubt that by any measurement, what you're speaking is the truth with the Wake Forest offense being able to produce against basically everyone played. And no, the schedule's not killer, but it's still, they've played some capable defenses and just rang up tons of points and yardage. Then they hit the Clemson defense, and it's like nothing. So is this, we went into this season with a narrative that, okay, Clemson's still going to be a contender. They're still going to be right there, especially with the schedule. But even without the schedule, this is still an elite team. But it's going to be offensive driven. The defense is going to have to catch up. And the defense, how does this defense get better when they lose what I consider to be the best defensive line that I've ever seen? Right.
Well, the best answer to that is because there's 11 players on that side of the ball, not just 4. I mean, just simple math. Now, I agree with you. It's replacing that defensive line last year was a fool's errand. But what we've seen is that this defensive line, because this wasn't like a bunch of true freshmen that have never played college football coming in to replace those guys. We're talking about guys who got a lot of playing time over the past couple of years. The only reason they weren't starting is because of the guys that were in front of them and the guys that they decided to come back for that one final hurrah last year. But on the back end of the defense, especially in the linebacker core, linebacker has been a very sticky situation for Clemson for several years now. And of course, the secondary has been as well. This collectively, and this is scary to think about. If you think about some of the great Brent Venables defenses over the past half of a decade at Clemson, this might be the best overall defense that he's had. And that's scary. And the defensive line is completely caught up to earlier in the season, the secondary was sort of carrying that defense, but now they're playing as a complete and total team on the line of scrimmage and behind. So it's a very, very scary situation for anybody that has to meet Clemson. We hear the narrative of Clemson's lucky because they get to come into the postseason unscathed with very few injuries. That may be true. Even if it's true, LSU, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, any of these, or Oregon, any of these teams that could possibly still make it into the playoffs, I promise you, they do not want to see a Brent Venables defense that's playing the way they're playing right now. If they do think they want to see that, they're lying to themselves.
People have thought that in the past, that they wanted to see a team out of the ACC that was apparently soft, and it's been Clemson the last few years. And of course, it was Florida State about 5 years ago in 2013 when they ripped through the college football. Well, they ripped through a championship game is what they did at that point after ripping through the ACC. Obviously, that was the last BCS title game. Got Pigskin Pete on the line. Please check him out on YouTube. So you just go over to Pigskin Pete. Very easy to look up. It's right on the screen right there. He not only talks Clemson football, but gives his take on the national scene as well and the ACC. Speaking of which, anything else on Clemson? Trevor Lawrence's performance before we move on to the national scene. Much made out of the interceptions and the errant throws early on. Again, not a lot of attention on Clemson just because of the games and the blowouts and the non-competitiveness of the situation, but he is playing much better.
Yeah, definitely not surprised about that at all. It was a little bit surprising how careless he was with the football in the beginning of the season. And you heard a lot of people say Clemson looks bored. Well, you know what? I think that Trevor Lawrence was kind of bored. I think that both, how talented he is and how great he played last year, that carried it over into this year. His confidence was through the roof. He thought he could make every throw, even when the receiver's not open. One of those type of situations where everyone looks open, even when they're not. And he just tried to do too much. He's tried to live up to the hype that was set for him by us fans and, of course, the national media as well. And it came back to bite him. I think he finally realized after that, after the first half of the Louisville game, that he didn't have to be Superman because of the competition they're playing against. And look at all the weapons around him. You have one of the top 3 running backs in America. You have one of the top 3 wide receiver cores in America. You have one of the best offensive lines in America. So all around you is everything that you need just not to screw up. And let's be honest, he was screwing up a lot. Now, they weren't in jeopardy of losing any of those games other than North Carolina as a result of that. But he's finally settled in to just running the offense and letting everything else come to him. And so this is another guy, that's very, the Clemson offense right now is playing as well as anybody in the country. It's hard to judge how great they are playing against maybe some of these teams, but I still think, we heard the same narrative last year going into the Alabama game and the Notre Dame game for that matter. Is this guy's young. He's a gunslinger. He's got a great arm, but how is he going to stack up against these really great defenses? They haven't seen a defense like this all year. Well, I think you're going to see the same thing happen this year. He's just getting better, which is scary. I think he's definitely better and smarter than he was at this time last year. And we saw what he did at the end of last year.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, share the videos, and subscribe. We got Pigskin Pete on the line talking Clemson first and foremost, and we'll get to the national scene in just a second. Travis Etienne, one of the guys that you're talking about in regards to star power on the offensive side of the ball for the Tigers. He's on the verge of becoming the school's all-time rushing leader. He is the all-time leader in touchdowns. He's going to be the ACC's leader in touchdowns, barring injury. So let that sink in, people. An entire conference being the touchdown leader for a career for an entire football conference is pretty impressive. But what comes to mind is, let's say, Saquon Barkley. That guy was the face of Penn State football. He was the guy along with Trace McSorley. Everybody knew who he was. Travis Etienne, obviously, if you watch college football, if you don't know who Travis Etienne, then I would, I'm going to take your fan tag off of you. But I don't know that he's given the due credit of his ability. Like, people are going to look back maybe in 5 or 10 years and Clemson games are going to be brought up that this guy was on a national stage constantly delivering. And I don't know that he's thought about as an elite all-time great player.
I think a lot of that has to do with the fact of how many touches he gets in his career. And this is a good thing for him going into the National Football League. Obviously, they want a guy who's a great player who doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires, right? Because the running backs usually are the first to go early in their career. They have maybe a 3 or 4 year lifespan. The vast majority of them do. But he's only averaging maybe 10 or 11 carries a game through his career. That's really unbelievable if you think about it. If you look at the amount of touchdowns that he got, you just mentioned he could possibly become the all-time ACC leader in touchdowns. You think about some of the great running backs. I know people want to say the ACC is terrible. No, we're talking about all-time. Go back, Florida State running backs. Hell, Clemson running backs. You have C.J. Spiller. You've got Davis. I mean, there's all kinds of great players. Even Wayne Gallman a few years ago was a great player for Clemson. But to be an all-time leader is a really, truly amazing statistic. And again, like I said, his yards per carry on average are through the roof. They're almost 9 for his entire career. He was over 8 his freshman year, over 8 last year, and he's over 8 this year. And I don't see any signs of that slowing down. We've only got one more regular season game, and then hopefully the ACC championship game. But still, it's an amazing feat. Dabo Swinney said about him that he thinks that he's going to be an all-time great running back in the NFL because he has everything it takes. He's got the speed, he's got the power, he's got the vision. The one thing that he's improved on massively this year that was a big-time problem for him was catching the ball out of the backfield. He was not very reliable doing that. In fact, he was pretty bad at it the past couple of years. He's made major strides and improvements in that this year, and he's finally becoming a complete back and not just a speed back or just a bruiser. Also, his pass protection in the past 2 seasons has been abysmal. I mean, to the point where I used to come on YouTube after the Clemson games and scream and beg and plead, if there's anybody in Clemson, South Carolina that's listening to me on YouTube, stop letting him pass protect for Trevor Lawrence. You're going to get this guy killed. He's finally getting much better at that as well. And I think he's a first round talent. I mean, anybody who doesn't think he's a first round pick in this coming draft is crazy.
Oh, I'm going to have to edit. I had it right there and my internet zapped out on me.
Okay.
Here we go. The touchdown leaders right here. All right, Pete. Here's the list right here. James Conner with 56 career touchdowns at Pitt. Travis Etienne at 55. He's one behind, so he's right there. Then you've got Wally Lundy, Travis Zachary, Ted Brown, C.J. Spiller, Lamar Jackson, Leon Johnson, James Davis, Warwick Dunn, Dalvin Cook. As we go down the list, I was going to make this mention as some of the names that we wouldn't necessarily associate with greatness in ACC football didn't pop up. We have to take into consideration most of the great players take off after 3 years, and they're not necessarily going to be in those statistical categories career-wise. And, Dalvin Cook came to mind immediately. Warwick Dunn came to mind immediately. The Clemson backs that you mentioned in particular, Duke Johnson, I know, scored a ton of touchdowns, as did Mark Walton at Miami. And, of course, with Miami, you got to kind of decipher, okay, when did they break off from the Big East and how many of those players played in the ACC. But there you go. Travis Etienne, almost 9 yards per carry for his career, going to be the all-time scoring leader in the ACC. And I just think most people look at him as, he's fast, he's a great player, but he's kind of a plug-and-play guy, and they would do just fine with somebody else. I don't know that he gets the due, but Dabo says a great future for him in the NFL. That should be interesting to see. And, of course, it goes hand in hand with something that you alluded to a few minutes ago, Pete, and that's the offensive line, which I think was the last unit to catch up with the greatness of the entire program.
Yes.
And I think they've done it now.
They have. Now, going into next year, that might be a bit of an issue. It's a very veteran offensive line here. Now, they did shift some players around after last year. Of course, they moved the guard to center and made a couple of adjustments that way. But this is a very, very experienced offensive line. And so it's going to be hard to replace them. But, the same way that we spoke about how do you replace that defensive line from last year? I mean, the way that Clemson's recruiting right now is just it's unbelievable. It's the best in the history of the program, without a doubt. I mean, even over this playoff run, these 2 out of these last 3 national championships, if you look at this class that we have here, Clemson up until this point has been averaging somewhere around 12 or 13 nationally rankings under Dabo Swinney over the past 5 years, and we're on pace to be probably one. We'll see what some of these undecided guys do this December, but 1 or 2, I don't know what it is, 1 or 2. I think our previous highest ranking ever was number 3 back in maybe 2013, if I'm not mistaken by that. I think the year that Deshaun Watson came in. But and things don't seem like they're slowing down. We have a bunch of commits for 2021. These young guys that are, highly rated. So I just the train continues to build. The snowball continues to get bigger as they roll down the hill, and there doesn't seem to be anything in sight that can slow them down, especially not in their conference. So until Florida State can get their crap together, and until Miami can get relevant again, Virginia Tech is doing their best to resemble a good football team. They won 5 in a row, but still in comparison to Clemson, it's not even close. So at this point, the next 2 or 3 years, even if these teams in Florida State and Miami and Virginia Tech and Louisville, I think will also come on strong at some point. But it's going to take them 2 or 3 years, the situation that they're in, no matter what, right? So do you see anything in Clemson's way in the ACC, outside of a major catastrophe, a major injury to a key player or something that could slow them down? I don't see it.
So the problem is that it's going to take them 2 or 3 years, but we're not talking about 2 or 3 years to become an elite, to become the Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia that moves into the ACC and can challenge Clemson. We're talking about being decent. We're talking
Yes.
about Florida State maybe being 8-4, 9-3, and then, still getting clocked by Clemson and not being a serious factor. But obviously, I think Florida State, Miami are the two letdowns in the ACC because they've got the recruiting footprint and the resources to get it done, especially Florida State. When you talk about some of these other schools, I think Bronco Mendenhall is doing a tremendous job at Virginia, but I don't know how good it can get at Virginia.
There's a ceiling there for sure. Yeah.
He's coaching his brains out, but he can only do so much there. Virginia Tech's done it in the past in spots, but again, not elite consistently.
Right. Yeah. And I honestly thought that that their coach is going to be fired this year, and I don't think he will be now. He's won 5 in a row. If he wins this weekend against Pitt, that's probably pretty much going to lock up the Coastal for them. Now, it probably still might come down to them in Virginia. You might know better than me. I haven't really looked at the wins and losses for the conference.
Yeah, so I basically broke this down a couple days ago, and the Virginia Tech game could decide the whole thing. So it's a muddled mess, except Virginia holds the tiebreakers, the key ones. So if they just beat Virginia Tech, they will win it. So that's the only game that matters. But if Virginia Tech wins that game, then it becomes like it's total chaos, a zillion tiebreakers. I went through the whole list of down to like 10 tiebreakers. The committee of the ACC flips a coin kind of thing at the end of the whole deal, because it could be like a 5-3, 5-3, 5-3, 5-3 mess at the top of that, which I think is fun.
Yeah, it's not fun to have people outside of the conference because they just feel like it's a bunch of mediocre teams, which is what it is, especially in the Coastal Division. But for people like me, when's the last time that a Virginia and Virginia Tech game at the last Saturday of November was relevant to college football in any way? We have a chance to see that this year. So and plus we've also seen that Virginia hasn't beat Virginia Tech in a very long time, even when they're a better team. I mean, last year Virginia was miles ahead of Virginia Tech, and they still found a way to lose that game, which was very disappointing if you're a Virginia fan. But I think out of all those rivalry games on the last Saturday of November, especially in the ACC, that is definitely the most compelling one to watch. I'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah, love the rivalry week, even if they're not relevant for that particular year. But this certainly holds the ACC. Again, if Virginia wins, they've got it. That's all there is to it. It becomes a very simple equation. But if Virginia Tech wins, then there are all sorts of tiebreakers to go through. Got Pigskin Peete on the line talking Clemson football. Please join him on his YouTube channel. Just search Pigskin Peete.